Robert Berdella, a seemingly harmless antiques dealer with a green thumb, resided in a serene suburban area in Kansas City, Missouri. Yet beneath the carefully polished exterior of his home lurked a monstrous secret. He was a sadistic serial killer. In 1982, Berdella established his own booth at the Westport Flea Market, christening it Bob's Bazaar, ethnological curiosities from the world's far corners. Located at 817 Westport Road, this seemingly quaint shop, specializing in primitive art, jewelry, and antiques, served as a facade for his sinister activities. Behind the veneer of respectability, Berdella indulged his darkest desires, earning the chilling moniker the Kansas City Butcher. While Jeffrey Dahmer's crimes gained significant notoriety, he was not the only serial killer targeting men. Kansas City also had its own horrific figure in Robert Berdella, known as the Butcher. Unlike Dahmer, who often ended his victims' lives quickly, Berdella engaged in prolonged persecution, often spanning days or weeks. His sadistic acts were meticulously documented in a torture book. Berdella's criminal activities began in the mid-1980s. Young men started disappearing from the streets of Kansas City. His victims were often vulnerable individuals, such as the homeless or sex workers, who were lured to his home under false pretenses. Once there, they were subjected to a horrific ordeal of misery, pillage, and ultimately, death. Berdella's methods were extremely brutal, involving the use of various instruments of suffering. He would often prolong his victims' suffering, deriving pleasure from their pain. Berdella would entice young men to his home for social activities. After drugging them, he would restrain and abuse them, often recording these acts in his torture book. Dimdo. At a flea market, Berdella met Paul Howell, a fellow merchant. Berdella later became acquainted with Howell's younger son Jerry, who was tragically kidnapped by Bob in 1987 and held captive for several weeks before being unalived. Berdella and Howell had a romantic relationship that eventually turned violent. Berdella drugged Howell and subjected him to physical and SA. Berdella claimed Howell's death was accidental. He disposed of Howell's body in a gruesome manner, documenting his actions in a detailed diary. Berdella also took photographs of Howell during the crime, creating a disturbing record of his crimes. Robert Sheldon was the second victim in a series of horrific crimes committed by Bob Berdella and was subjected to a harrowing ordeal involving SA, torment, misdeeds, and the injection of Drano into his eyes. The intent was to blind Sheldon, making him easier to control and exploit. Ultimately, Sheldon was suffocated, dismembered, and disposed of in a gruesome manner. Sheldon's head was kept in a freezer before being buried in the backyard. Mark Wallace was the third victim of Bob Berdella. Unlike the previous victims, he did not harm or exploit Wallace before unaliving him. Instead, Bob experimented with electrocution on Wallace, ultimately causing his death. This method of killing was a departure from his typical modus operandi, suggesting that he may have been experimenting with different ways to inflict pain and suffering on his victims. The circumstances surrounding Wallace's death remain relatively unknown, but it is believed that he targeted him due to his proximity to Berdella's residence. The swiftness of Wallace's death suggests that Bob may have been seeking a more efficient and less time-consuming method of unaliving. Walter Ferris was the fourth victim. Berdella injected Ferris with a combination of drugs, leading to his death. The exact cause of death remains uncertain, but Bob claimed it was either an overdose or the result of a harmful drug combination. After Ferris's death, he dismembered his body and disposed of the remains in the trash. Todd Stoops also endured injustice, including SA. Berdella's actions were particularly brutal as he shoved his fist into Stoops' bowels, causing severe internal injuries. Stoops bled heavily and developed a fever. Despite Stoops' suffering, Berdella continued to target him. Tragically, Stoops died from his injuries. Afterward, Berdella kept the wrapped remains of Stoops' body in the basement for days. Larry Pearson was the final victim to lose his life. Berdella claimed that Pearson was more compliant and did not require as much physical punishment. After 6 weeks of captivity, Pearson became desperate and attacked Berdella, biting his penis. Pearson cried out that he could no longer endure the injustice. In response, Berdella unalived Pearson by striking him on the head with a tree branch, then suffocating him with a bag and a ligature. Afterward, Berdella sought medical attention for his injury. Berdella's crimes came to light in 1988. He had unalived at least 6 young men between 1984 and 1987. A crucial mistake led to his arrest. 22-year-old Chris Bryson managed to escape from Berdella's house on Charlotte Street by jumping out of a second-story window. A passerby witnessed Bryson's escape and alerted the police. Paused. The events that followed were shocking and disturbing. Bryson had been lured to a party and taken to Berdella's house days earlier. He entered the three-story building willingly, believing he could manage the man who called himself Bob. Bryson described the house as filthy and reeking of waste. As he climbed the stairs, Berdella struck him on the head and injected him with a sedative. When Bryson regained consciousness, he found himself bound to a bed, no clothes on, and wearing a dog collar. Bob had kept track of what he did to Bryson's unconscious body in his journal. He essayed him and bound his head in a pillowcase, taking pictures to document the process. When Bryson awoke, he quickly realized he was unable to get out of his restraints. The pillowcase was loosened to expose Bryson's face, and the groggy young man pleaded for his freedom. Bob's sadistic response was to jab Bryson in the eyes with his finger, then a Q-tip dabbed in something that stung. An electrical device had been attached to Bryson's male genitalia and thigh. After beating Bryson's hands with an iron bar, Bob turned on the electricity. He took pictures while Bryson suffered. After the mistreatment, Bryson was drugged once more. When he awoke, Bob informed him he was now his plaything or toy, and warned the previous punishments were nothing compared to what he could do. Bryson spent 4 days being gnarled, drugged, and essayed by Bob. Sometimes Bob injected his victim's throat with drain cleaner. He told Bryson how others had died for their misbehavior and showed him pictures. Bryson was kept tied to the bed with the dog collar and leash, but Bob made the mistake of letting the man have his hands tied in front of him. Bryson got free and fled as soon as Bob left the house. Between Chris Bryson's first-hand account and a neighbor reporting a foul odor coming from his home, the police were dispatched. When the police entered the house, they found the room and electrical equipment Bryson described. But they also found much more. Inside Berdella's bedroom, detectives found 2 human skulls and envelopes containing teeth. A collection of audio tapes, the torture notebook, and photographs of other males bound and assaulted were also found. A bag of human vertebrae was discovered in the house along with men's passports and phone numbers. After finding the skulls and vertebrae, police searched the property for additional human remains. Following a thorough investigation, authorities discovered evidence that linked Berdella to an unaliving. A human body was found buried in his backyard, and a chainsaw covered in blood and hair was seized. Despite the lack of additional bodies, the overwhelming evidence against Berdella led to his arrest and subsequent conviction. He confessed to the murder and admitted to killing the victim in his home. Berdella quickly confessed so that he could be sentenced to life imprisonment for his crimes. The circumstances surrounding this case are truly horrific and difficult to grasp. However, it is essential to remember that the victim of this terrible crime endured immense suffering. Their pain and loss cannot be understated. The case of Robert Berdella had a profound and lasting impact on the community of Kansas City. His crimes were so horrific that they became the subject of numerous true crime books and documentaries. Berdella's legacy serves as a chilling reminder of the depths to which human depravity can sink. Once Berdella's case became public knowledge, popular rumor would have it that he cooked and served some of his victims as food at his shop, though there is no actual evidence to suggest that was the case. Thank you for joining me on this dark journey through the crimes of Bob Berdella. If you're into true crime like I am, hit that like and subscribe button. Be cautious. Filthy acts and danger lurks in the shadows.